Welcome back. Now, President Muhammadu Buhari is asking the National Assembly to approve 819.5 billion naira for the 2023 or 2022 rather supplementary budget. This, according to the president, has become necessary following the after effects of the floods and other challenges in the economy. President Buhari says the budget will be financed with new domestic borrowings, adding that the country decided to explore a supplementary budget because of the impact of flood and the need to complete major roads that are at 85% completion. The president added that if the supplementary budget is approved, there will be a total deficit of 8.17 trillion naira in 2022. Now, experts have raised concerns as the federal government continues to obtain new loans from both local and external sources, despite the growing debt profile of the country and, of course, the cost of servicing those debt. Now, there seems to be no end in sight, as there's always a reason to borrow this money. Joining me to discuss this further now is economic expert Gospel Obele, who joins us from the United Kingdom. Gospel, thank you very much for joining us on the program. What's your take on this request by the president? 819 point something billion naira now in supplementary budget.
Thank you very much, DG. Really, really great to speak with you today. Yes, it was largely expected. I mean, in terms of possible fiscal actions that will be taken by the administration, as a result of the flooding. We all know that the flooding was going to, it has a lot of impact on the Nigerian economy, especially on food. And the FAO have also noted that about 17 to 35 million Nigerians stand the risk of poverty, as a result of the looming food crisis, due to the flood situation in Nigeria. So having said that, it's okay to say that institutions, are looking for ways to, fix the challenge. However, in as much as this is a bit fair, it again borders heavily on the fact that we are a very reactionary driven people in terms of the damage must have been done first before we begin to find solutions. There are 101 ways we could have managed risk or even averted the risk of flooding in the first place, especially flooding, in fact, on food production centers in Nigeria. But then again, the conversation now is how do we manage, or how do we begin to find a way around the damage that's happened? And as a result, the conversations around the new supplementary budget. So number one, it's not surprising, just to create a context around it. Number two, the big concern is, however, that even if those monies have been approved by the Senate and the central government accesses those funds, what are the plans to ensure that those investments or those monies goes into the right investment to ensure that the critical capital or infrastructural investments or projects are executed, to avert this kind of challenge again next time. There is nothing wrong if we can build silos of production centers, more strategic production centers, from the core food production centers down to the south. We could always plan for another rainy day, but I do not necessarily see these monies invested in that direction. There's still likely going to be further investment in what has not been working, and all of that. So we're not so much of a very visionary, thinking, detailed strategic people such that our investments are beginning to build for the future. And that's where the worry is. And again, the worry around these debts, because how do you plan to pay back this debt, knowing fully well that these monies are not going into investable projects that can lead to increased productivity turnaround, even in food production and all that.
And just to put it in context so that, people can actually understand the enormity of the flooding we had in Nigeria. About 34 of Nigeria's 36 states were affected, and over 600,000 hectares of land affected. Now, to put it in context, that will be like 3 times the size of Luxembourg. So this is really massive. Now, it's good you talked about the issue of the debt, and that's actually a concern, because no doubt this will definitely balloon the debt profile of the country, which of course a lot of people like yourselves too have actually expressed concern. Now the question is revenue. On the side of revenue, we're not doing well, because what experts like you have also said is that, look, when you look at the size of our debt, it's not as if it's so much, but the problem is that we are not generating enough revenue to offset this debt. Now, how do we deal with that? I mean, the government, of course, has introduced a number of revenue initiatives and all of that, but the problem is, and of course, we can see oil is now gradually picking up, but how do we need to work on our revenue side to ensure that, you know, we're able to generate the kind of revenue that this country needs to drive its economy and pay back these debts?
Thank you very much. What we've seen over time is that the wheel has not been strong enough to fix revenue, and where the wheel has been strong, the efforts that accompany those wheels have not been very strategic or enabling. So you see that on the line of strategic concerns, you see that the efforts have been yielded much more around all sector related revenue mobilization efforts. Secondly, we're also seeing that the strategic or the efforts that have been yielded in that direction as well has been more around extracting monies from economic agents rather than supporting them to be much more prosperous so that they can, you know, grow compliance, as it were. One of the major challenges that Nigeria have with its tax system is that there's a big concern around compliance. You know, it's not just a concern of increasing the tax base. No, it's about how do you expand the tax net by encouraging or inspiring compliance. A lot of Nigerian businesses do not pay taxes, not because they do not have the money or they don't want to, but because they cannot trust, you know, the government to use those monies for what they'll be used for. So there's need to inspire compliance. You don't raise or grow revenue through taxes by enforcing laws or by setting targets for your agencies. Your agencies will keep chasing SMEs or businesses, and businesses will keep looking for creative ways to circumvent the process. All right, so the agencies have to come with the mindset of supporting and enabling. When it's driven from that angle, it's a lot easier for people to comply. Having said that, there is also little or no effort in terms of now strategic and will around the non-oil sector block in terms of mapping that block enough for access to market, you know, for export financing, for exports, for encouraging exports, you know, and all that, and such that can also help us, you know, grow a lot of foreign exchange receipts, you know, that can help the revenue side. So there's a lot of effort around conventional tax collection, you know, struggling to squeeze from the very little you have internally, and you're not even doing anything around, you know, the external or international markets. Whereas there's a lot more that we can do, that can be done. Also, is the concern around government leakages. I mean, there are a lot of government leakages, there are a lot of waste in government. If you close the leakages and you cut down waste, you will have a lot of monies, you know, that are available that can be plowed back into investments or critical infrastructure that can further enable SMEs thrive, and then that can also come back into your system as, you know, taxable revenues and all of that. Or in context, you can also use those monies to empower a critical sector of SMEs who are ready or export ready, you know, to do more around getting their products outside the country, until Nigerian chocolates can be purchased in Zurich by the Brazilian, and he or she loves it. You know, Nigeria may not necessarily leave this revenue crisis that we are in, but we have what it takes. However, the will has not been strong enough to drive those reforms. Where those wheels have, that wheel has been strong, it has not been strategic, and the efforts have not been sought after or perceived to be enabling enough to galvanize, you know, the non-oil sector productive block, and that's where the concern is.
Let's talk about the deficit now. I mean, the expectation is that once approval is given for this request now, it will shoot up the deficit for the 2022 budget to over 8 trillion naira. That's really massive, if you ask me. And the government has continued to maintain that, look, it's debts, that the debts are sustainable, that it can actually pay back on these debts, and that it will not default. Of course, it has not defaulted. But looking at the size of the 2022 budget deficit alone, how worried are you that we would be able to pay back?
I mean, I'm extremely worried because in 2004, we were not even close to 50% of what the size is right now. You know, and yet it was a big deal at the time where Dr. Koje Ngoziwela and then President Olusegun Obasanjo had to, you know, find a way to get the Paris Club buy-in to forgive 60% of the debt. The big concerns after that period was, you know, the hope that Nigeria would never reach such limits. But Nigeria has not only reached there, we've surpassed, you know, technically, you know, those debt amounts and all that. But then the government keeps saying that they can repay. Do not forget that these folks won't be there in the next 3 to 4, 5, 6 years, even 10 years, even 20 years. So the debt is being piled up for the next administration and for the next generation of young leaders who do not even understand the weight of crisis or challenge we are faced with. Again, I mean, the conversations around Nigeria being able to pay back its debt is just a political correct statement. Just like saying that inflation reduced on a month-on-month, but actually prices of bread is still going high. So these narratives are built heavily on political correctness. And because we have citizens who are not aware, who are not connecting, who do not, or NGOs or social enterprises who do not do the hard work of interrogating government policies, you have a context where a lot of people are not economically, are economic illiterates in context, and they cannot engage or question government rightly. So the government thrives on the balance of political correctness, to get its way through and all of that. However, I don't see the debt being sustainable, and that's because debts are normal, fiscal deficits are normal everywhere in the world. But you realize that the only way to make your debt sustainable is if those monies itself are being plugged into investable projects or sectors that have high productivity drivers, such that as you are earning on those returns in 3 to 4 years, those monies can come back not just to expand your economy only, but you can also service your debt, and you can use those monies to also scale your economy, the market, the infrastructure, and do more for yourselves. But what we've seen a lot of times is that things have remained the same over the years. So how is it possible that you're not spending those monies in sectors where they need to be spent, and you're not unlocking those drivers, and you're coming to say it's sustainable? I don't think it's sustainable. In fact, to a very large extent, sometimes the definition of sustainability is when they look at the debt GDP ratio. Nigeria still has one of the manageable debt to GDP ratios in the world. And those are the arguments upon which not just political officials, even economists, brag about Nigerians debt that it's still in the same place. It's not in the same place because how can you have a worsening debt and a crippled revenue position? Well, it's really a self-destructive approach.
The good thing is that it appears those who are managing the debt are actually aware of this, because I mean they're on record to have said, look, you're right, just as you said. They've made that argument that Nigeria's debt to GDP is quite good, but that the problem is the debt to revenue ratio, which of course is a problem. Let me just read out something from the Director General of the Debt Management Office now, and I want your reaction to that. This is what she said about our debt just a while ago. She said over 60% of our external debt is actually from concessional sources. So we're talking of costs that are at most 3% and are spread out over a long period. So she said, look, if we didn't do those strategies, if we didn't put those strategies in place, the debt service will actually be higher. So while people talk about debt stock growing, a lot of it is actually long tenured, both the external and domestic, and they are not all due now. What would you say about that?
To be honest, within the context of loan restructuring, and the events that have happened in the past 2-3 years, that's a very fair strategy in terms of spreading, and all of that, so that you don't have so much on your table to have to service another. You can still pace yourself. But then that is built on the premise that all things are equal. All things are equal. And we live in a world where things are not equal in any way. We want to think about interest rates. How globally interest rates have been going up. Let's not forget that the Nigerian currency, is constantly failing, and we are not engaging the right structural dynamics to fix its productivity question. All right, and the economy itself is not productive to power the currency. Let's also not forget that the debts are not, in many cases, are not in your local currency. All right, they are in dollars or euros, as the case may be. And if you look at what would the currency be in the next 10 years in terms of value, and what would the interest rate economics look like in the next 10 years? If you capture all that plus the productivity at the Nigerian productivity level in the next 5 to 10 years, then we can properly answer that question to say that I do not think it's sustainable in any way, in the real context of things, because like I mentioned earlier, it's going to pile up a lot for the next generation of leaders and the next administration to come. So whilst you are having a good time today and yet still not investing those monies in the critical sectors that will drive productivity, you are piling up bigger problems. Because if these monies were actually plugged in sectors that will unlock productivity, like technology, like export markets, like entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship ecosystem and all of those things, like technology and etc., then we can safely say that assertion is built on the premise that these monies are spent in productive sectors. So even if you spread the loan repayment for a very long time, you're quite sure that by then you would have regained the benefits of these investments in these productive sectors, and you can pay back more conveniently regardless of what the interest rates will be by then. Because by the economics of productivity, your currency will be in a better position to engage.
Yeah, I understand you. Gospel Obele, thank you very much for joining us on the program, and thank you for your insights.
Thank you very much for having me as well.
Thank you, and Merry Christmas.
Yes, same to you, sir.
All right, we'll take a short break and we'll be right back. Stay with us. Don't go away. Opinions are free. Facts are sacred. But truth is universal. How, in practical terms, can we, for instance, de-escalate the tension?
President must see himself as the President of the Federal Republic.
We know where the enemy is. 3 places. The Lake Chad Basin, the border area between Nigeria and Cameroon, and then the Sambisa Forest.
On DEJI360, we give you a complete dose of everything. Opinion, facts, and undiluted truth.
I hardly believe what politicians say in this part of the world.
A new Nigeria is possible, a future is possible.
We delve into the issues, dissect it so that you can understand it, and use it to take action.
I don't think there's any need for any governor to look for grant for ranching.
DEJI360, dissecting the issues.